today and get started. And one of the hot topics that we need to address right up front is the GMD language. So, committee? What you have to say? Anybody? Representative Orr.
Mr. Chairman, I can start this discussion. I think we've overlooked an awful lot concerning the GMDs. I think the GMDs is the most crucial part of this entire water plan. That's where we get the ground roots. And what I have found loud and clear in my observations here is that the GMDs are all very unique and very different, and I think we have to treat them differently. And I don't think one brush can paint all of them the same. And I think this is going to be necessary to have much more discussion than what we've had. And I don't see any way that we can go forward on just the GMDs. And I would really like to set that part out and view it next year or following. I think in many cases we're right here like the Kansas City Chiefs were a few weeks ago. And we got 16 seconds to get the ball across the line, and I'm fearful that we'll do something wrong as opposed to putting the ball where we want it. And I would rather be cautious and go slow at this point in time than I would to make a mistake. And it seems to me the reasonable thing to do is to set this apart and say this is a high priority, and we will take some time going forward next year and attempt to deal with the GMD issue, which I think is crucial to this whole thing. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Fairchild.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to say that I agree with Representative Orr's comments, and I think that we need to just look at that issue next year and place that aside. And I think that's one of the main concerns that the Farm Bureau and other groups have, and people out in my county and my district is the GMD part of it. And I would prefer that, that either we wait until next year to address that or that we pass an amendment that significantly changes that part of the bill.
Representative Murphy.
I would kind of echo that, and like I said, they're quite diverse in their needs and the way they're handling it and all. And while we all know there's a problem, there's never going to be a perfect solution either. And I think we take the time to get it right instead of trying to rush something through. And we know the way that happens lots of times ends up with worse than what we started with. So thank you.
Okay. I think Representative Riley, but Mr. Chair. So I have a question, because there are obviously some communication issues with some of the GMDs and who they represent, and I'm speaking specifically of my district, which I think we all got an email on that. Is there any way to do like a special committee or something to study this out and to evaluate what's going on, or is that a possibility? Because I think we need answers on some of these things now, and I think GMD3 is conservation and reports things like that. So is there a solution for that, or?
There's always a solution.
Okay, and I agree with taking our time. I appreciated all the input between the landowners versus the voters' rights. Those are some really valid points that we need to think about, but there's some immediate things that need to be addressed as well. So I guess I look to you for options on that.
Okay. Representative Riley, you were first, and then.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I would go along with what the previous speakers have been saying. I mean, after listening to testimony, and even when I originally went through and read this bill, there were so many things in there that were trying to control the GMDs and make major changes to the GMDs and make goals for the GMDs. And I think your main goal, if I was hearing this right, is what we had the representative from Montgomery County that came in yesterday and talked to us about. I mean, the goal is to get this a voice of water in Kansas through getting that person up on the governor's level cabinet. And I think we need to not have so many things in our way to get that accomplished. And so we just have so many things in and out of this bill. I mean, I could sit there and talk about little changes, and we could talk about big changes, but I think if we can get this settled out like everybody's talking about, of not affecting the GMDs at this point and getting a year's worth of time and input from them, I think we would be a whole lot better off. So thank you.
Representative Byers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think the issues that we'll start looking at on the GMDs is twofold. That one of the issues that we're looking at is the diversity of each of the GMDs, how they all have different issues that they work on, and respectfully, what are required for their geographical location within the state. But I think the other issue is the voting component of it when we look at representation. As we move forward with it, maybe we need to put back and do study how we can have better representative voting that protects all the entities involved in the GMDs, but also continue with perhaps a reporting component. So the GMDs begin to get reports in that we can give us more information to study, so we know exactly what's going on within each GMD, and that those reports be timely and complete, so that we can see what's really happening along those lines. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Vaughn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you all for the discussion. I'm in support of the wisdom of the committee, and going off of Representative Byers' comment, I think if we want to study this question further, something that we could do that might provide further insight into some of the issues that we're addressing could be, for example, parts of the accountability pieces that were part of this, including the reporting of finances. It seemed like the GMDs were relatively neutral on that aspect of this. So if we were interested in learning about their receipts and expenditures to better inform this discussion, that could be something that we might consider moving forward with, depending on how you all feel about that. And then, as we talk about the conservation and stabilization plans, is that something that we could also request within the next year? Can we get an idea of what the GMDs have done, are in the process of doing, and plan to do to actively work towards a conservation and stabilization plan? So those might be some additional thoughts I have. And I know the representation of different beneficial uses came up a lot yesterday. So, I think that could definitely be part of this studying process. It may feel too rushed, but we could also look at, clarifying some of the language around that in the short term to later address it a bit more broadly in the long term. I've thought about, does it make sense to have appointments for each of the biggest beneficial uses to make sure that in the short term those voices are still represented, and then the greater structure can be modified in the long term. So I know those are just some beginning thoughts, but would throw some of those ideas out there as well. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Representative Minix.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate all the comments around the table here today. As I looked at the proponent testimony on Wednesday, it appeared to me that a lot of that was from the municipal areas and talking about the structure. And then on Thursday, the opponents, we got into more of the rural areas and talking about the GMDs. I think there's some GMDs out there actually doing very good work. I look at GMD 4 and their water conservation, the LEMAs and things that they have instituted, and they're in their 5th or 6th year. I really appreciate those types of things. I think there's some things within that model that are working well, and yet in some of other GMDs, there are conflicts. I will readily acknowledge that we need a broader representation on our GMD boards. We're dealing with water as a pure subject, but we're not homogeneous across the state. There are so many differences, and I do like the local control. And I think that portion needs more study. If we could come back and change something in the GMD Act in the future to encourage more representation, more transparency, I think that would be good for all stakeholders. So that's kind of where I'm at on that issue. Thank you.
Representative Newland.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm not going to belabor this much because I think Representative Minix and Representative Vaughn have both touched on a couple of extremely good issues and points about this whole GMD aspect. And the reporting and having a plan is probably the most, the one aspect of this that we've not had. All the time we say, well, we've got to do this, we got to do this, but yet we don't see that point blank plan. And I think that's what really needs to happen besides the election process. And I do agree with Representative Byers that this has to be updated. And I think there are several ways and ought to do that. You know, back in the day, and I'm dating myself, you know, we used to have wards that elected a representative, you know, for different things. So there's possibilities out there for different ways to elect, but we really have to keep in mind the main user of water and protect all rights as we proceed forward on this. So with that, yes, I think there's structures that we can put into place. I think there's some accountability that we can demand because we are the legislative body and we need to have that kind of information to make our decisions. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the opportunity to speak and I'll give it back to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Schmidt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a complex issue, as we all know. I don't think that's a reason why we should just say, well, let's put it off till next year. I think we need to work on it, and I think we need to take bits and pieces as we can, and if that takes us to next year, so be it. But the obvious thing that I see right now, and again, I'm the rookie in all of this, but what I see obvious is there's a conflict about representation on the GMDs. And, you know, I think there's some wording in this proposed bill that would actually flip the majority the other way, and I don't think that's good because we're all in this together. This is not one side or the other. We're all in it together. We're going to sink or swim together here. So I think I'm going to throw something out here that's a possibility as far as the membership, that we do something such as we say, you know, if you got a 7-man board, you got 2 municipal, 2 agricultural, and 3 at large, something like that. I'm just throwing that out for discussion. You see that happen in a lot of places because it's clear that we've got some conflict between the groups here. And the only way you resolve that is you bring them together and you talk about it. So I think that's something we can start working on right now, and how far we get, I don't know. Thank you, sir.
Representative Stogsdill online.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First thing I want to say, I want to thank you for providing us with, I think, an incredible educational process over last year and this year. This is an extremely complex issue. And I think it was unrealistic of the legislature as a whole to think that we could address this entire problem in one session. And but I think we have. I've gotten to know more about water over the last 2 years than I ever thought I would ever know in my entire life. So I think that process has been really, really good. And we brought in the right people, and now we have the background to really ask intelligent questions. And I think that's going to take a while to get those questions answered. From my point of view, from my part of the state, what I would like to see more of is a deep look into the quality and quantity and sustainability of drinking water in this state. And I certainly understand and appreciate the agricultural needs that we have for water in the state, but we also have to have a clean water plan that brings clean and affordable water to every Kansan across the state, no matter where you are. So I would like to see us, if we're going to have some interim committees or anything along that line, I would like to see one that would delve more deeply into drinking water issues in Kansas and how do we sustain those, how do we improve those, that sort of thing. But I think this has been a good process last year and this year, but I think it's going to take more time than what the legislature gave us to have this last year and this year. So I would like to see us continue with this discussion and look at both sides of the coin, as I say, both agricultural uses and drinking water uses. So that would be my input on this.
Thank you. For the comments on this issue. Then I would, Representative Jacobs.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Of course, this is my first year on this committee, and at first, when I was told I was going to be on water, I was like, man, that's going to be a dry subject. But I do feel like I'm drowning in all these facts. But on a serious note, it's one of the things I took out and put in my little notes was this quote from a conferee. It says, and this was his little argument, it is the policy of this act to preserve basic water use doctrine and to establish the right of local water users to determine their destiny with respect to the use of groundwater. Yet, the bill proposes to strike the definition of water user and shift control of this destiny away from the water user. Additionally, by removing the definitions of water user and landowner, it appears to make unclear who the GMDs can assess or described in KSA 82.8 and so on. Finally, the district questions why the bill proposes to apply term limits to GMD board members and why a state agency would be given the power to appoint GMD board members in the event not all open seats are filled at election. And I know we all heard that, and that was an exhausted point, but this is a major bill, and again, not to get everybody overwhelmed or over their head, but I think we do need to take some time and tread through this pretty lightly. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Representative Crop.
I figure since everybody else has talked, I might as well, right? Mr. Chair, thank you again for your patience with me through this process. You know, I've been slightly distracted as I go through it. I am trying to make my way through everything, but I just wanted to tell you, you know, regardless of what happens in all the discussion here, you and your team have actually changed our state already. You've changed the discussions. Yeah, absolutely. You've changed the discussions. You shed light on an issue. I've been around the world and I've seen the effects of water and the lack of water, the wars and conflict that it's created. When I first started, the only thing I would hear about is hey, I got a question about my water bill. That's about the only question I heard about water when I went around the state or even in my area. Now I go to meetings in Johnson County and I get asked water questions more than I'm asked about redistricting questions, just so you know. That's you. That's what you guys have done. So I would just tell you, I mean, I also heard about rural versus urban. You know, we had this, no, I don't hear that anymore. What I hear now is how do we as a state solve this problem? So regardless of where we go, rest assured the fact that you have changed this state and where we're heading. So I appreciate your leadership. I appreciate the leadership team and everything you've done, and keep being patient with me, please. Thank you, sir.
Cost me a lot for him to do that. Well, everybody's given their opinion and their thoughts. I'll make a suggestion, and it's only a suggestion. So I would say let's remove the section on the GMD changes, except for the reporting part. We need to have that in there so that they can report to us those two areas that Representative Newland mentioned, the finances and their plan. We need to see that. So those two things I think need to be in there. I would then say that as a committee, we will request an interim committee this summer. And along with that will be a request for a post-audit study of the GMD and how they're functioning within the GMD laws. Both function, are they doing what the law says they're supposed to be doing, and that sort of thing, how they're doing. Election procedure, I'm saying that we need to request an AG opinion. Professor Griggs brought up some points in his talk that were a little worrisome to me. And I think the AG needs to weigh in and help us out on that issue. I don't want to get us in trouble by passing something that could be perceived as illegal and end up in a lawsuit immediately. But at the same time, we need to know what they're doing is legal, what they're doing. Tying property rights, ownership to a voting, that smacks a little bit of 1860s. So we need to be real careful in that area. So that is only a suggestion. So what do you think? Please.
I think it's a wonderful idea. I would think that also when we start looking into the reporting mechanisms, that we not just look at, on the GMD side, the number of water right users, but approximate gallonages used per user type. So we know in a GMD, for instance, in GMD2, what is the usage coming out of the municipalities, what's usage on industrial, what's the usage for irrigators, so that we know, because we have over-appropriated rights in many cases, and we need to see what's actually being used as close as we can find. I realize that some things are not metered exactly, but to get that idea of where the water's really going and how much.
That information is available now, and we can have research gather that for the committee so that you have an idea where the water is, how much is being used by whom. We do have that information. Further comments? Representative Howerton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think this is a great idea. I don't want to put off decisions until next year. I think we need to take action where we can take action, and I agree with that. Thank you very much.
Representative Schmidt.
I would echo that, and I like the suggestion you made about the election issue, that we run that through the Attorney General's office and make sure that anything we do is legal and don't end up in a lawsuit. But I think we should get ready to take that on as soon as we find out what the situation is.
Representative Cross.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree. I think the interim committee is a very good idea to be able to tear into each area of the bill and get more information on all the good points that it has brought up. Also, I wonder, since we have the GMDs and there's one particular one that seems to be so successful, and I realize that things are different, needs are different across the state in different areas. But can they share? I mean, why can't we take some of those positive things that they're doing and share them with the other ones? And I know that can happen. It's out there. But it just seems like if we have something that works for one, it can be altered a bit, and you take the good from that and add it to the other ones, and see if we can't get them to work better even together, to share things that even if it won't work for everybody across the state, there's still really good things in some of the GMDs that could be used by the other ones. And I wish that we could get somehow to get them to play well together and share some good things for the betterment of the state water conditions. Thank you.
Representative Orr.
Representative Carlson, I agree with much of what you said, and some of the testimony yesterday we heard is that we as a body sometimes forget, and I'm taking this out of context of what was said, but we want to force some change and we want to do it quickly, and that's not the way it works. And if you're dealing with some farmers, the last thing you want to do is to tell them, and the way you negate change is to do it exactly the way the GMDs are attempting to do it, and that's slowly. And I'm a farmer myself, and I hate rules, regulations, and yet I eventually will get to the right place. And that's why I think we must go much slower on this. I appreciate your comments. I think we need to reconsider the fact that the farmers, Kansans, usually do things right. It just takes us a little bit of time. And that's what this organization, that's what this committee, I think, can be proud of what we've accomplished. We have raised the awareness very much, and I think we've done a lot of good. If we were to quit today, I think some positive things will happen, and I got an email this morning that I thought was extremely positive concerning one of the GMDs. He indicated some issues that he had, and if you read that, it says we will solve these. And they just simply need some time. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Further comments? Representative Newland.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One thing that I would like to see also is see what the relationship is between the DWRs and the GMDs, and then see a post-audit of the DWRs as we get an audit of the GMDs.
Well, when I request, and I would make this a joint interim committee between the Senate and House, both represented, we have to specifically say what we're going to look at. And so that'll be included in that request, which once it's written, I will share it with the committee to see if they agree with the request. Okay, back to Representative Riley.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So in addition to that, while we're discussing pulling the as long as we're talking about pulling, not working this language right now, can we also include at least a 3-year hiatus or whatever you want to call it on those fees for these folks so that they can transition into these increase, 66% increase in fees? I mean, as long as we're pulling them out, trying to figure that whole thing out, that give them a little slack, 2 to 3 years slack. So just a suggestion.
Okay, you're jumping ahead a little bit. Are we done talking about the GMDs at this point? Well, but it concerns more than just them. Go ahead, Representative Vaughn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this could be a broader suggestion for addressing some of these issues, but throughout this process, we've also seen the really good work of the Kansas Water Authority in partnership with the regional advisory committees, and the way that they can aggregate a lot of this information from across the state to inform the legislature of what's going on and what the priorities are in counties across our state. So just as part of the discussion, I wonder if it might be beneficial to have them as part of the interim conversation as well in some way.
Further GMD discussion. So I take it that if we ask the reviser to prepare an amendment to remove the GMD from the bill, except for the 2 reporting requests. Everybody comfortable with that? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to, while we're on the topic, to clarify, are we, and this can be maybe sorted out, but the effective date on the bill right now is July 1, 2023. So if the reporting requirements are wanted sooner than that, then some further amendments will have to be made to kind of make all those effective dates work. Just wanted to bring that to the committee's attention.
And bringing up the reporting dates, within the bill, it says the most recent audit will be presented. And yesterday, some of them were talking about they don't have time to get it. They get those in March. But it's the most recent year is what will be brought before the legislature. I reread it. I thought the verbiage was clear to me. So those comments I thought they misread it and thought that they had to get it done by February or March 15th, I think it was. But anyway, we'll work with the revisor on that. Okay, now, Representative Howard.
Just for clarification, is there a certain date they have to report by, or what are the rules for that?
Within the bill, I think, if I'm correct, it says what, March 15th?
It's February 1 is the date, but with the effective date, that would essentially make it, as it stands now, February 1 of 2024. But again, as I said, we can work those dates out as the amendment wants.
So the soonest that we would have a new report would be February 1 of next year?
If we change it to 2023, yes.
Okay.
And it would be their audit from not this year, but the previous year, is the way it's worded. And that'll be the most recent one they have. That make sense? I know, I see it.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. One idea I had on this too, I don't know if we'd want to request the most recent audited report, but if that was for the year prior, is there a way to request their unaudited receipts and expenditures up to the point of the request date, if that makes sense?
Well, we were asking for 2 reports, but yes, we can ask for their unaudited. We can do that for the previous year. How can we do that?
Thank you, Mr. What exactly how can you word that? Or, I mean, it depends on when you want the reports to be due. If the intent is to make the reporting requirements, the effective date of those, July 1, 2022, then as I said, the date in section 13 is February 1, so it would be, the most recently audited report or finances, and then unaudited finances up to whatever date the report you would want that due. If that answers your question.
Do they have a fiscal year that they report on, accounting-wise?
Answer that, please.
Eddie, my name is Mark Rude. If I could help, we audit every year our finances, and they are filed with the state. And so those records are available now up until, I think we just completed our audit. We're presenting it at our annual meeting next week. And then it goes to the state and to everybody else that wants it, if that helps you.
So I guess my question is the timing of this does not allow the legislator, like us as a committee, to review anything? Because you're doing this after we've already started all of our discussions, and that's not going to help. So then we are dealing with a year-old information, and that's not productive in my mind, so.
Well, if I may.
Yeah, please.
We struggle with that too as a GMD3 because we want to, in our annual report to the legislature on the Ark River Western Water Conservation Projects Fund that you got a copy of with my testimony yesterday, we want to get you the most current information possible. So we've asked our auditors to put us at the front of the line, and the best we can do usually is about mid-February so far.
Do you have any kind of profit and loss that we could print like the end of December that you could submit that wouldn't be audited?
Oh, yes. Yeah, we have books. We could provide an update that way. QuickBooks, pretty handy.
So Representative Howerton, you get to work with the reviser and get that wording correct as to what we should see.
And one question I heard that I didn't answer on fiscal year, it's calendar year.
First would give us a really good picture.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
I'm glad you volunteered. Representative Orr.
I'd like to thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Howerton, a couple things here I hope you are understanding. This committee has changed a lot from last year, and there's no guarantee that this committee will even be in existence next year. So for us to be responsible for that is kind of a misnomer. I think we got state people that are looking, and all we have to do is ask for that information as an individual if we want it. Does that make sense?
I was just thinking the committee, whoever was on here could look at it.
I know. And see, what if this committee is not even in existence next year? It wasn't 3 years ago. Does that make sense? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To that point, as Section 3 stands now, it does require the board of each district to annually submit to the House Standing Committee on Water, House Standing Committee on Agriculture, Senate Committee on Ag and Natural Resources, and any other appropriate committees and any successor committees. So that's how the language stands now.
Okay. Now, next topic, fees.
So, Mr. Chair, again, my suggestion was, and again, we're open for a lot of different things. I heard that in our testimony yesterday, that maybe we need to have a little, I don't know whether it's a shock absorber or whatever, but for these folks to absorb the differences in fees, that we would give them an exemption for 3 years or something until they can kind of in their own boards adjust to those new fees. I mean, it's individual people are going to be paying these new increased 66% fees and the new water fees that weren't there before, and all of a sudden in 1 year you're going to put a lot of money expense onto these folks. So that's my suggestion.
Just for information, Connie, how much would it raise the municipal user, say they use 10,000 gallons a month? How much would it raise their water bill? I know it's 67%, as we've all read over and over again, thanks to, anyway.
Okay, Connie Owen, Director of the Kansas Water Office. And in all these discussions, I chose to look at my own Water One bill. And I live in Johnson County, and I pay 34 cents a month in the water protection fee. So an increase to me of 66%, you can do the math, 50 cents? I mean, I hope that answers your question.
So 50 cents a month.
It may go up by about whatever 66% of 34 cents is. So.
$0.12. So.
And that was just for GMDs, not for everybody, just to affect the GMDs, going back to that.
Oh, so you want to delay, you want to put in place a municipal water protection fee, but then on the GMDs, you want to delay that one. Is that what you're saying? Okay. Other comments? Representative Carlson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Is that the fees in Section 9, Representative Riley? Is that the fees in Section 9? The, I don't know. It seems to me like we all pay for our water. We have to pay for our water. In the municipalities, we pay by usage. So I just don't see in agriculture, and I don't farm, but I just don't see that that is a over charge that anybody is going to bulk from, minimum of 25 and maximum of 250. If we're going to start taking care of our water, I think we have to start paying for our water, and I don't see that that is going to really cause a lot of problem in my district, and it is very, very agriculture. So I don't see the need to have a 3-year ease on that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I see where you're coming from, and, you know, if we're talking about this on an individual basis, municipalities are going to send most of that cost on to their people that are paying the bills. So, you know, 12 cents addition for different individuals, we're not going to probably see that as much. But I would like to hear from a GMD what their response would that be because of how much they're paying. That's my focus, not so much everybody else, but I want to hear from them what that cost would be because you're irrigating with hundreds of thousands of gallons every day. So.
Representative Fairchild.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, if the new fee on water rights is going to be viewed as being a user fee, it doesn't really seem like it actually is a user fee when it's based on authorized quantity and not based on the amount of water that's actually used. And so to me, I guess it doesn't really seem like a user fee when that's how it's set up. And so I think for it to actually be a user fee, it would need to actually be based on the authorized quantity. And that is one other objection that I think that some of the opponents have to it is how that's set up as far as being based on authorized quantity and not on the use of it.
I think the original intent was to be for the measured actual use and not the allocation. So you can't encourage conservation if you don't know what's being used. And I agree wholeheartedly on that. So Representative Orr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On this water issue, I think we got several very positive things happening in the fact that the governor is going to be funding the water, she says 100%. I'm not sure what that looks like, and I have no idea where that money is going to be spent. And before I'm interested in raising more additional fees, I think we need to see what the result of that is going to be. I'm hopeful that it's going to be funded as I perceive it, but I'm only going to believe it after I see it. So at this point in time, I do not think we need additional fees when we don't even know where we're going to be spending them. Once we see how this happens, once we see if the water fund is funded like we think it's going to be, then let's see where the needs are. And let's reevaluate this at a later time. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Vaughn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And, you know, the $8 million that fully funds the water plan, those enhancements are currently in the budget and are being analyzed by the Ag and Natural Resources Budget Subcommittee. And I know that those dollars are allocated with the advice of the RACs and the Kansas Water Authority with all of the local input that comes along with that. So I hesitate to say that we need to wait to see if that money is well spent because they've been advocating for this money for a long time with very specific uses in mind. And, you know, I think the part where I can really agree with this is that the state has not paid enough in terms of the long-term underfunding of the state water plan fund. We have looked at that in committee, and it equates to almost $85 million in arrears that we had promised the state water plan fund and never delivered on. So I think the state has to play ball, but I think I would disagree with the notion that this money could not be well spent right now, because I think it definitely could be. Thank you.
Representative Newland.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, I won't belabor the issue a whole lot more, but because there's a lot of great points. I even brought this up in our city, in our Garden City, when we were out there, that our water bill is fairly cheap right now. And at some point in time, and I hope that the transfer of funds and all will happen. But I really think we need to see how this works and plays out within the whole water system. And also, that would be my thoughts. Thank you.
Further comments? I think we'll stop that discussion for now and let everybody think about it over the weekend. Sure. Representative Vaughn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The only additional thought I would add on that is, again, leave it up to the wisdom of the committee. The input that I've kind of received on that is, if everybody doesn't come to the table, I don't think anyone wants to come to the table. Specifically, I've had conversations with a few municipalities, and I think they're willing to pay more. I mean, these fees haven't been increased since 1989 for the water protection fee. And part of this discussion has also been that GMDs also have the ability to levy taxes on their assessed members. And in that regard, those members are paying for water. But there are still a lot of individuals in our state who benefit from significant contributions of water without directly paying for it. And the proposed fee equals $1 for 165,000 gallons of water. So I encourage everyone to, think about it, and if it's not the time to do this, then I think that's, again, we can leave it up to the wisdom of the committee. But I think if we want to find a way to more sustainably fund water, then we have to get everybody at the table. So that's the comment I would share on that as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Riley.
Well, going back to my original thing on the GMDs, is it possible that there would be somebody in the room that would be willing to testify from a GMD that would have a thought about that at this point?
Not going to use the word testify, but if anybody would like to share their thoughts, they're welcome to come forward.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and the committee. I'm a little short. Can you guys hear me better now? Oh, it's kind of spongy. Okay. Anyway, I'm Shannon Kenyon. I'm the manager for the Groundwater Management District Number 4 in Northwest Kansas. And as far as the fees go, currently we assess at 35 cents per acre foot of water. That is the authorized quantity. However, somebody, one of our water users can turn in what they call a verified claim that says, I only used X amount of water this year, and that is only what they are assessed on. So, and I think that is GMD wide. We kind of do it different, a little bit different per each GMD, but that is our ability to assess. So they already do pay into the GMD a pretty hefty fee for the most part, couple $100 usually for the average water user. So if there's any other questions. Okay, thank you.
Back to the question that's been raised by Representative Orr. Can Connie and the groups out here, can you give us a sheet that says about where the money's going in a simplification manner and where the money is lacking, and without it you can't do those things, that so the committee can look at that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Everyone at the beginning of session got a copy of the Water Authority's annual report, and in that is a list, and what we're talking about with this is the State Water Plan Fund that exists and was designated by the legislature to pay for programs in the State Water Plan. There are, at current time, 4 different agencies that actually implement these programs. So we have a single fund. You may not be able to see this chart very well, but I think you can see they're kind of 4 big chunks. This is on page 3. And the Department of Health and Environment implements a number of these programs. The Department of Agriculture, through their Division of Conservation and Division of Water Resources, implements a great number of these programs. The Kansas Water Office, my office, implements a number of these programs, and the Department of Wildlife and Parks implements one of these programs. We also help support work of the Kansas Geological Survey. So there are 35 line items with the State Water Plan Fund. The identification of what those items should be and how much of the State Water Plan Fund should pay for them, those are recommendations of the Kansas Water Authority. That's the advisory board of folks from across the state, most of whom are governor's appointees, but also legislative leadership appointees. They identify their priorities out of everything in the water plan, because you can't pay for everything. So they identify their priority programs and how much they would like to see spent on those each year. Those recommendations come from input from our regional advisory committees, our 14 grassroots groups all across the state of individual folks who live, breathe, work water every day of their lives. Their input comes up as well as from the state agencies, what they know, what they see, what they can do. The Water Authority puts all that together through their budget committee. They come up with their own set of recommendations. By statute, they're required to give recommendations for how to spend the State Water Plan Fund every year. This year, the governor has exactly echoed and approved and endorsed every one of those requests. So for FY 2023, the recommendations of the Kansas Water Authority have passed with approval out of the governor's office, if you can phrase it that way. As I said, there are different agencies that implement different components of this. So we have to present those separately in our own agency budgets. And I'm pleased to report that the water office component of the State Water Plan funds, that both the House and Senate committees this week endorsed and passed with approval our recommendations for those line items out of the State Water Plan Fund, even with a couple of suggestions for enhancements, which was very gratifying. So every year in the Water Authority's annual report, my office prepares the content, they review it and approve it. We account for what was done, what was spent, and what do we intend to do with the money going forward? What do the agencies, the water plan, what does the water plan say needs to happen next? And I would also point out, as has been mentioned, that the Water Authority also requested, as they do every year, that the 2 statutory transfers into the Water Plan Fund be fully funded this year. And one is $6 million from the State General Fund. One is $2 million from the Economic Development Initiatives Fund, for the total of $8 million. So it has been 15 years since those full statutory transfers have been approved and deposited, if you will, into the State Water Plan Fund. The Water Authority asks for that every year. This year, the governor has said that she agrees and also recommends the same. And so we are hoping that eventually in the process, that will be, in fact, approved. We also want to point out that, as some of you might have been familiar with the 50-year vision process that took place a number of years ago, with a Herculean amount of effort from grassroots people all across the state and virtually every state agency that had anything to do with water. And part of that process for recommending how to handle water for the next 50 years was a blue ribbon task force whose job was to say, at that time, everything in the Kansas Water Plan, and we're on the verge of issuing a new update, it's close to 300 pages, everything that's in there, if that was to be paid for fully every year, the Blue Ribbon Task Force said $50 to $55 million a year. So I would caution the idea of fully funding the water plan. We're nowhere near, but we are on the right track. It is very heartening and very exciting. So there's all kinds of documentation. We can provide as much information on the programs that are implemented and what the Water Authority requested, to the extent that anybody would like us to provide more information. I hope that's helpful.
I think Representative Orr's comments were good. I guess what would, every group is asked to prioritize. So I guess what we would like to see are what priority items are not being funded at this time. If the budget's all approved and everything, what priority items are not being funded that the increased fees would help fund?
Okay, so we can, if I understand you correctly, we could provide information on programs that are currently not being identified for funding. Is that,
right? Because you explained that everybody comes in with their priority list, and so at some point there's a cutoff because there's no money for them.
right, the Water Authority distills all that down. So really, the answer to that, without going back to the Water Authority to sort of ask for a second tier of priorities, would be everything in the water plan that isn't in those 35 line items or isn't fully in those 35 line items. Does that make sense? Because the Water Authority doesn't prioritize everything in the water plan 1 to 300. Am I missing what you're asking? I'm happy to provide more information on what's not getting funded, if that will be helpful.
That's what I'm asking.
Okay.
In a roundabout way. Oh, yeah. Victoria, if you would, pass out the budget that she was referring to. And I think Representative Riley asked for an expanded version of this at one point, and we received that via email, and it's in the S drive as well. Okay, so everybody has some things to think about. Representative Vaughn.
Sorry, you guys are probably going to be tired of hearing from me by the end of the day today. Thank you, Mr. Chair. One piece of feedback I've received and that I think would be interesting for the committee to think about on this topic as well is the desire for, I think specifically around the water rights fee, but to identify ways to ensure that that money goes back to communities that it's coming from. And I wonder if there are ways that we can encourage these funds to be used for conservation-minded programs or technologies that benefit the communities who are helping pay for these things. So I don't know if there's a feasible way to do that, but as we look at cost share programs, irrigation technology, water reuse, recycling, updating public water supply systems, some of our rural communities are the hardest hit, and I don't know if there are ways that we can encourage some of these funds to be used for those purposes. So that's something I might throw out to the committee as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Vaughn, I would attempt to answer that by saying that's exactly what the GMDs do. And that's why it's so important to keep their autonomy. They charge different fees, they do what they think is best, and it all comes from their own representation. So I think that's a great point. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I understand what you're saying, but if you start tying the hands of the state and the allocation of funds, and if you have an emergency somewhere and you put it in statute, they can't spend it any more than, say, 10% for that area, then you've tied their hands, and then it'd have to go all the way through the legislature again to remove that. But I'm a little hesitant on that kind of a structure in a bill. Sometimes you have to trust, and then that comes from legislators putting pressure on areas of need and so forth. So I have a little problem with that one. I understand the concept, I understand the reasoning, but I'm not sure it's something we can do in statute and make it work. But, so, the fee structure is a problem for some, and some want to delay it for some time. We have problems in our state, and I'm thinking of the municipalities right now. I'm talking the small towns and their needs for upgrading their water, both treatment and wastewater treatment, and then the underground lines. These are big issues, and part of this money was, in my mind, was going to be used to protect those towns. If we don't help them, they could end up in bankruptcy and fold up and blow away. And that's what we don't want. We want to help the small communities throughout the state. Larger communities, they can help themselves in most cases, but the small ones cannot. And uranium removal, that is a great example out west. The next town over, Deerfield, they couldn't afford that. But Lakin had built in enough capacity, they were able to voluntarily help them. But what about Holcomb? What about Garden City? And then we're finding it in Northwest Kansas. So we've got areas that we're going to need to be funding. And that's the whole purpose for the fee increases. Now, is the fee too high? Your answer is what?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I can't say the fee's too high or too low, but I think we got to wait till the need arises. And I am adamantly opposed to stockpiling money in Topeka. We've seen in the past what happens. We create a fund, we fund it what we think is reasonable, and it gets swept eventually. And it hasn't happened for a few years, but it used to happen on a regular basis. And I will be adamantly opposed to stockpiling a fee for tomorrow for that very reason. And that's just where I come from. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Well, they testified that if we want to help these communities that are out of compliance right now with EPA laws on pure water and wastewater treatment, it would take what, 51 or 61 million dollars? I can't remember the number. 61. We don't have that money. So I'm not in favor of stockpiling, no. Representative Murphy.
I would echo your comments. I kind of jump back onto something else. There was a lot of this money floating around from the COVID stuff and gets given to counties and things like that. And I went to a few meetings trying to encourage some of it maybe to go to what you're talking about in these small towns that don't have much. And of course, where does it all go? It all goes into the big city and to help with daycare and things like that. So if we're gonna try to earmark some stuff, that would certainly be a worthy cause, because like I said, these towns are getting smaller and smaller, and so now their base is even smaller. It just becomes a bigger and bigger problem to solve for them. So, something needs to be turned around a little bit, some way or another.
I've been in the Secretary of Commerce's office more than once with those very comments and encouragement to think about the smaller communities and all that. And the more of us that do that, the better it's going to be. So feel free to go visit him.
Absolutely.
Representative Stogsdill online.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What you said about the small towns and their water treatment needs and their wastewater treatment needs, I think really echoes what I've been trying to say about we can't be totally focused on strictly ag uses of water. This is not an ag water committee, it's a water committee. And I think sometimes we don't think about the critical needs for drinking water and wastewater facilities, what we're going to need in Kansas. I don't want to see those small towns blow away. And I want to make sure that they have adequate drinking water and wastewater facilities to keep them in business. But if you, and also when I attended the Meet in the Middle conference out in Lindsborg a couple of years ago, we had a demographer from Kansas State came in and pointed out that probably by around 2040, 83% of the people in Kansas will live in 9 counties. And we have got to figure out, we can't wait 15 years to look at drinking water and how we process wastewater and so on. And it may be too late at that point. So although I'm very sympathetic with how we handle ag water issues and so on, and I think that's extremely important for one of our most important industries in Kansas, I think we really cannot forget about how we're going to deal with drinking water, how we're going to deal with wastewater processing and that sort of thing. So I think, again, if we have an interim committee, maybe we ought to have a separate one that brings in resources from Water One and other water districts across the state. Because when we took the tour of Water One, we saw how technologically intensive the process is to keep our water clean. And it's every bit as intensive way we handle wastewater processing and so on too. So I think that maybe we really asked those entities like Water One what they're going to need in the next 15 years. How are we going to handle all of these people in the urban areas and at the same time keep those small towns vibrant and accessible to clean water and good wastewater processing. So anyway, that's I hate to be the most singular voice on drinking water and so on, but I think it's just an incredibly critical issue for Kansas to address. And with the changing populations and demographics and so on in the state, I don't think we can wait on that either. So that's just my perspective. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Chris, how are you receiving a lot of requests for amendments? Are you overwhelmed is the question.
I can handle it, I guess. So.
The reason I ask is on the schedule, we have to work the bill on Monday. I'm prepared to not work it on Monday. We'll have to work it after turnaround. It is a blessed bill so that we have that time so that some folks can noodle with agencies or whoever they want to noodle with. And I've asked you to allow him to share so that we're not all doing the same amendment on everything. So with that, then I'll ask you to update the agenda for next week and say no meeting on Monday. Representative Minix.
Mr. Chairman, as I'm sitting here thinking about a long-term fund and building a fund, nobody likes to see money sitting here at Topeka doing nothing. But I flash back to some comments and talk that we had about reservoir capacity with the Corps of Engineers and some balloon payments in the future. As we're looking at fee structures here, how, you know, if we get to 2040 and we're expected to make a $40 million payment on a reservoir balloon payment to the Corps of Engineers, in the past, I'm assuming that was just drawn out of state general fund. And if someone could address that as I'm trying to consider through fees, I want to put some of those pieces together, please.
Mr. Lewis, would you try to address that?
You bet. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Earl Lewis. So it's kind of been a mix, in all honesty, in the past. We really haven't faced a balloon payment to date. The first one really, I think, is in 2027 when we've got that facing us. The closest thing we've had to that, frankly, is an opportunity based on in 1985, we entered into a kind of a unique MOU with the Corps of Engineers that gave us an opportunity to buy storage at original construction price, but we had to do that within a 10-year period. And there were some other things that were tied into that, obviously. Bottom line is we got to 1995 and 1996. Time was running out, bill came due. It was about $15 million at that time. Luckily, there was, in some ways, just like you guys were talking about today, somewhat of a windfall in which there was $13 million that had been paid into the general fund by a previous tax bill that finally got collected, if you will. And in that time, the chair of Ag and Natural Resources budget said, I'm going to take this $13 million, and that's what we're going to pay for it. The rest of it, $1.9 million, the difference was borrowed out of the PMIB and paid back over a 10-year period from the State Water Plan Fund. So that's the closest we have at this point, and I know that if there's discussion about paying some of that debt off today, really you're talking about state general fund, right? That's where that reserve, as it would be today, sits. So I think the plan, if that doesn't happen, there's 5 reservoirs: Milford, Perry, Hillsdale, Clinton, and Big Hill. Hillsdale, Clinton, and Big Hill are all part of what we call the water marketing program, water sales. There's an expectation that if those aren't paid off before the end of the term in 2027, 2029, and 2031, that there would be revenue bonds issued to pay off the balance of those and paid back with the water marketing fund, the revenue from that source over a 15 or 20-year period. Milford and Perry are not in that same program. We run 2 different programs. There's an expectation over time at Milford and Perry that those would go into what's called our water assurance program that serves the municipal industrial water holders on the Kansas River. I think those folks understand that. The issue we have, and we will need that storage, the issue we have is the time that we need that storage. Our projections are in the 2060s is when we fully would need all that storage. The bill at Milford comes due in 2034, and in Perry it comes due in 2041. So we've got a gap of when we've got to pay the federal government versus when we expect the demand that's going to pay that back is going to be. And so that's our gap. We don't have that same funding, and if we don't have that dealt with before then, we'd have to come back to the general fund or some other way of funding that at that point. If I've probably given you a whole lot more information than you wanted, but that's kind of where the history and the plan as it sits today.
My understanding, one of those contracts was like 4.9% interest right now.
I think both Hillsdale and Big Hill are just over 4, between 4 and 4.5. I don't think anywhere at that 4.9, maybe 4.1, I think, or somewhere in that range. If I remember, don't hold me to these. We'll have to get you actual numbers. Clinton's about 3.5. Milford's right at 3. Perry's at like 2.6.
So at this time, we're not receiving user fees at a level that would make these payments.
That's correct. There are, and I know in the water office budget, there's a recommendation to pay off about $2 million of the Hillsdale debt. So when the state has been taking advantage of when we have had more income from water sales to pay down debt and try and move the ball forward as much as we can. But it's always a balance of how much do you raise those user fees and versus paying off debt. And so there's been a concerted effort to try and pay down debt, but we are not keeping up. We're not getting there as fast as we need to, I guess, is the bottom line.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Anything else for the good of the committee today? Representative Newland.
Mr. Chair, if we don't meet Monday to further discuss these issues and we wait until we try to work the bill, how are we going to get all this done? Because there's several more components of this bill that I feel that we need to discuss before we actually try to work it.
So you're requesting a meeting on Monday then?
I would.
Okay. So change the agenda back. Just a committee meeting. Anything else? Did good work today. Thank you very much. Representative Orr.
I guess I would like to echo some of the things that Representative Cross commented on. We have done a lot of good work here, Mr. Chairman, and I applaud you for what you've done. This last week, I think we did something to show how much more work we have to do. This body allocated over $1 billion to a mystery company, and we didn't have water as a higher priority than some mystery company coming to Kansas. That upsets me and frustrates me a great deal. We have the money to do what we need to do right now. We had it. And until we continue what we're doing right here, thank you, Mr. Chair, to raise the awareness in Kansas of the severity of our problems, I don't think this legislature is going to get it. I applaud what you've done. I applaud what we're getting done. And I still will caution us, if we really want to go fast, we're going to have to slow down and do it right. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, committee, we are adjourned until Monday at Representative Newland's request.